So this one, okay, we went from Mike Lindell. We're about to go into Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was recently expelled from the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. So in some ways, you could argue she's not having a good week. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene's political takes and her political analyses have never been worth much. But she's almost outdone herself lately, because not only has she offered the latest round of articles of impeachment against President Biden, she is now putting forth legislation to try to order President Biden to withdraw the United States from NATO, the North Atlantic Trade Organization. And I want to play a clip here where Marjorie Taylor Greene makes the case, and then you and I can unpack it, Luke.
Amendment number 6 directs the president to withdraw the U.S. from NATO. My amendment would direct the president withdrawal from NATO. They are not a reliable partner whose defense spending should be paid for by American citizens. For the better part of the last decade, Germany has contributed only around 1% of its GDP to finance NATO obligations, while the United States is paying around 4% of our GDP to defend NATO countries. The United States has been financing and promising to defend NATO countries for decades and paying more than its fair share.
All right, Luke, so there you hear it. All right, so she's recently been kicked out of the Freedom Caucus. That's got a sting. And now she makes this ridiculous proposal to try to order the president to withdraw from NATO, even as Russia, NATO's, primary opponent outside of China, is invading Ukraine. Like, how ridiculous is that?
Very ridiculous. And a lot of people, even on the left, kind of have a default anti-NATO stance. I've said many times, though, nothing shows us why NATO is an organization that good can be gained from, derived from more than Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because Russia would have been much less likely to invade Ukraine if they knew that would be triggering a war with all of these countries, including the United States. And has the United States and countries in NATO acted improperly many, many times in the past? Yes. But would those actions be less likely to have happened if it weren't for NATO? And that's where I think the focus should be, because if the United States wants to meddle in other countries' affairs or invade a country, do some improper military action, most likely the United States will do it just based on the power of the United States military and government and all of that. It's not excusing those incorrect actions, but they would still be taken without NATO. But what wouldn't necessarily happen without NATO is that these smaller countries with less power wouldn't have the defense, the protection of the United States. And often it's just the fear of getting into conflict with all these more powerful countries that keeps safe the smaller, less powerful countries. And that's good. And that's something that NATO provides that wouldn't exist otherwise. That promise of the United States, the power of the United States will be behind you as a smaller country. So then countries that are in NATO that are smaller and less powerful, right now, Russia won't touch them, but they'll go after Ukraine for that exact reason, Josiah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, it's funny you say that, because President Biden is right now in Europe, and he is successfully, the Biden administration, and I'm sure, not in a vacuum, but the Biden administration took a prominent role in successfully getting Sweden to be eligible for membership into NATO. Turkey was kind of the holdout there, and the Biden administration was able to successfully persuade Erdogan to allow Sweden membership into NATO. So they're going to be a full vote, but it's expected to pass. And now Sweden will officially be part of NATO. And so to your point, I mean, again, no alliance in the history of geopolitics has had a squeaky clean moral track record. And you can point to certain diplomatic and military transgressions in NATO's history, to be sure. But the fact of the matter is, it does protect smaller countries, particularly from aggressive, overly imperialistic. Like, the imperialism of Russia is different. Right now, we're seeing it from the imperialism of even China. China favors a quote unquote softer approach to imperialism, where they're trying to expand their influence via resources and investment and things like that, which you could argue that's what the United States does to this day. Russia is still apparently prefers the stick, like in a very militant way. And we're seeing, as you said, Ukraine's a great example. Ukraine has repeatedly Their sovereignty has been repeatedly violated, not just a few years ago, but also back in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and things like that. So I mean, NATO provides an aegis, it provides a shield, it provides a protection, because Russia, of course, doesn't want to engage in conflict with other nuclear powers. So I think there's utility there. I think most people would agree that there is utility. And to those who say that NATO has outlived its purpose, which Marjorie Taylor Greene would argue, what's the alternative? Give me a better option, and I'm open to it.
And imagine if every country on Russia's border was not in NATO, you would have the chances of them being aggressed upon spike. And we could see the devastation we're seeing in Ukraine right now in so many other countries. And as you said, it absolutely serves a purpose. And you would have to argue why that is not the case to make a good, effective case for why NATO shouldn't be an organization the United States is in. But also this is in line with this weird MAGA anti-Ukraine belief right now. I've said before, we can have good faith conversations about how much support, what type of support, all of that. And I happen to be on the side of more in a lot of those conversations, but you can have good faith discussions that include a debate about that. But what we hear from MAGA and some other individuals on the political spectrum is this visceral hatred, it seems, and they'll make fun of and go after Zelensky as a person. It just doesn't at all fit into a reasonable debate. And that, I don't know where that comes from, genuinely. Do you have any idea before I give my only speculation?
No, but I do think that obviously there's a fringe part of the left and a tremendous part of the mainstream right, and as embodied, as well as the Freedom Caucus and Cult 45, that MAGA contingent. I think it's much more prevalent on the right than the left, but it manifests in both of those spaces where there are strong sympathies for Putin. Now, for me, my understanding is for the fringe left, it's I think a misunderstanding of objection to American imperialism. Like, you're right to object to imperialism on principle, but that doesn't mean that you have to, that you're not obligated to endorse another imperialist party, which in this case is Russia. So that's where I think the fringe left has its issue. And for MAGA, I think it's just they share Donald Trump, their cult leaders' admiration for authoritarian leaders like Putin.
It's the broken brain phenomenon of you want to simplify the world down into black and white, and so you break your own brain in a belief that might start out more acceptable. And what I mean by that is with the left's stance, the part of the left that's incorrect on their stance when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think it starts off with an acceptance of the fact that the United States has acted improperly and been an imperialist nation in the past, and recognizing that, but then taking that so far to believe that means everything the United States does has to be horrible, and every single foreign conflict we're in the wrong. And then that takes people who started out with the view to be anti-imperialist into a position of supporting active imperialism right now with Russia. Who's the imperialist nation in this conflict that we're talking about? Russia. And people break their brain wanting to believe, okay, I learned that the United States did bad things, and that means the United States always bad in every single situation. And that's just not how you can analyze any international affairs. Never in complex subjects like the ones that we deal with on a daily basis will that type of black and white thinking apply. And then with the right, I think, as you said, it's a little bit of this interest and fascination and love, admiration for strongman leaders, authoritarians, and if not that, for some of those who aren't as interested in that, maybe just, okay, Biden is doing this, so we're going to be the opposite of that.
Yeah, you could see a reflexive contrarianism on both sides, as you say. I think that of course, I'm biased because I'm on the left to one extent or another, as are you. And so, of course, when I see fringe leftists advocate for, or seem to sour on Ukraine, I can at least assume that there was a good faith predicate to that, which is, listen, you oppose imperialism, but as you say, the reflexive contrarianism has just driven you, okay, America is the most proximate imperialist force to me because I live in America. Therefore, I'm going to oppose or criticize everything America does. In this particular case, America is backing Ukraine. Ukraine is an adversary to American interests. Ergo, QED, Russia must be in the moral right of the situation, when obviously we know that's not true, and there's no moral equivalence to be made here. There are multiple types of imperialism, and you can easily make the argument that the United States still in financial and diplomatic ways has some imperial impulses. John Bolton, was the national security advisor for George W. Bush and for Trump. I think he's an imperialist at heart. But the imperialism demonstrated by Russia and Putin is much more aggressive, much more militant, and much more dangerous because people will die in greater numbers much quicker. Then as far as the MAGA thing, while you were talking, kind of reminded me, because I'm a pop culture buff. I watch a lot of movies, I read a lot of books, watch a lot of TV shows. People who, who are pop culture buffs tend to like good villains, right? Like we're always fascinated with villains as a society. But I think most of us have the good sense to recognize that Darth Vader and Hannibal Lecter and Voldemort, or whatever, they're fictional characters. And so to whatever extent we enjoy a good villain, they're creatures of fiction. Whereas MAGA has almost like blown that notion into the real world, that they have projected that in the real world. Putin is about the closest thing to a supervillain that geopolitics has. And there's this weird fetishization of Putin and Russia's imperialist ambitions that I think is genuinely unhealthy. And it starts with Donald Trump.
Thank you so much for watching. For the outro on this video, I want to plug Josiah's channel. Hit them with it, Josiah.
Hey, everybody. I appreciate you watching. You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. One word, pondering politics. If you like progressive commentary that focuses on coalition building with other elements of the left and calling the Republican Party out for what it's become, I hope you'll view my channel, give me a like and subscribe and some feedback. Again, youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. Thanks again.